So I asked you the question actually for the question, which is uh, why the necessity actually, why we see, why the investigators they are seeing that the processing of the crime and the, the scene uh, where the incident has happened is a prior or primordial step in every single investigation. Why actually the need or here actually the necessity is that because the planning requires to answer questions, requires to fulfill the target. This target actually is to yes to finalize the case. No more or less, it's not a matter of just I'm doing the investigation. I'm having a skill or a list of skills I'm just exploring. No, it's not like that. So it has to be planned well in prior. The context of the processing of the crime scene, or let's say the incident scene, it has to be actually a prior step because it's a step that it would clarify clearly the path of the investigation. Thus, it would actually cause to generate a much more clear reporting, let's say, and answer to all the related questions. Okay, let's get started with the unit number 6, which is talking about the operating system roadmap, via which we are going to deal with the Microsoft operating systems. We'll see a very primitive operating system, which is the disk operating system, the DOS, and with all the technologies that they do enhance the work of this, let's say, framework, which we, as investigators, as digital forensics specialists, has to consider in order to, yes, succeed in retrieving all what we require to answer all the questions we need, yes, to deal with our investigations. Yeah, the first actually amongst the objectives is not a matter of figuring here, but just to bring the attention is that the file system, which is actually the roadmap where the data is being spread across the storage devices inside the operating system or inside the hardware, whatever. Um, it is one of the purposes of this unit. So we are going to study the file system in the sense of what is the architecture via which the data or the metadata is being spread inside the storage device. This is the main concern. Then after we'll talk about the security wise of the storage devices. Mainly we'll talk about the encryption and decryption because storage devices they need to be secured and how to secure them, whether to isolate them physically or you are going to encrypt uh, the content. So continuing the context of the objectives only, so it's a matter of what we are going to see. The file system. So as per the first definition, what is the file system? When you talk about the whether it is a Microsoft-based or any other operating system, the file system is the roadmap where the actually data has been spread across the storage device. Not only a hard disk inside the computer or the static disk inside the computer, but even a flash disk, portable, yes, USB drive or compact disk or floppy, the old versions of the storage devices. All of them they are equipped with a file system, which is drawn the roadmap. Here, when you say the roadmap, means actually how the data is being spread inside the storage device. Because storing a file or list of files, it's not just a bag of data to put side by side. No, it's not like that. You have to recognize the architecture, system architecture. So we will explore that more and more here. And this roadmap or this file system is usually related to the operating system because there are a variety of file systems that they control hard disks. There is no one file system that controls all the storage devices. No, there are constraints. Amongst the constraints is the operating system in question. The file system of what? Which operating system? So the operating system has to um, it's not has to it influences the file system to be adopted. Okay. Usually, the file system starts with a mechanism, let's say, or let's say a system that loads the operating system in question in order to start functioning and delivering services. This loading system, it is the boot system, it is the boot sequence, which is made up of two components, the CMOS and the BIOS, complementary metal oxide, actually semiconductor, and the basic input-output system. The CMOS, they are actually, both of them, they are from within the ROM side. What it concerns the CMOS, it's the synchronization of the process, it's the clock of the motherboard, synchronization of the processes, and it is covering the clock of the motherboard. The basic input system, it's the system responsible for bringing out or bringing in the flow. Basic input-output system. So any peripheral that takes data from outside to the inside of the computer, or the vice versa, any peripheral that takes the data from inside of the computer to the external. Very simple, taking the example of the mouse and the screen, keyboard, and storage, external storage device, something like that. So all of those peripherals, they are controlled by the BIOS. The here those two components that they actually build in the boot sequence, the CMOS and the BIOS, they are not they are very well actually studied, and they are being to being actually doing their job in a very sequential manner, in the sense of actually they are clearly stating the orders of the execution at the beginning when loading the operating system step by step. So uh, so they indicate what to do from the launch of the let's say the start button until the full load of the operating system. But here in our concern, what it concerns us, we are not learning, we are not studying the boot sequence, how it works, but we are going to adopt the boot sequence to help us as investigators. So the sequential process of the CMOS has to be actually modified in order to help the investigators load and launch the device from a specific operating system, from a specific source. So investigators will use their own investigation operating system, which is a portable one, whether it is in a floppy disk or in a USB drive or in a CD or somewhere in a live media. So the CMOS has to be modified in order to load or to launch or to boot from this media. How to modify it is another context, but the CMOS, its main role is to, let's say, set the sequence of the boot, for example, and what we need to know here is that we are going to, as investigators, as digital forensics specialists, we need to modify this CMOS in order to reach, to boot from our media, our device where our operating system, our investigation operating system is. Yes, example of here, the BIOS, example of an interface. It's one of the interfaces, it's not unique. And here we are having the list of the boot menu. Actually the hard disks, they need to be actually recognized physically and logically, in the sense of, in order to accomplish the investigation, you have to know, you as an investigator, you have to know what is the object that you are dealing with, because in so many cases, actually, investigation requires you to explore physically the hard drive or the storage media. You have to know how and using what, and what is the thing actually in order to achieve. From other cases, from another perspective, if we are not dealing with the physical issues, only logical issues, we have to recognize the architecture of the hard drive or the storage media. To do so, actually, you have to know all the components of a hard disk, and for the concern of the logical approach, you have to know the file system in addition to the sector size actually, via which the data is being stored. So the hard is a matter of recognizing the parts names and what does it do. Logically, we talk about the file system. We said that it is the roadmap, how the data or the metadata is being spread and stored. In addition to that, we talk about the sector size, and here we talk about the size of the packet or the bank of data to be stored inside the hard drive or the stored device per slot, per shot, because we're going to store, for example, a file, a media, video. And this video, for example, is size 2 GBs, 2 gigabytes. And those 2 gigabytes, they are not going to be put just one block. No, they would be segregated inside the storage device in two groups. And this segregation is based on the sector size, the memory or the storage device sector size. And actually, what we are seeing here on the common one is 512 bytes, each sector size. Bytes, 512 bytes means half kilobyte. Half kilobyte. It's not even 1 kilo, it's a half. It's too small. Each sector. And those sectors, each would hold a portion of the data. Preview hard disk, yes. Still, yeah, just have to pass through. It's not something mysterious. The hard disks actually in the storage devices, they are equipped with capacities to store data, and those capacities is due to the technology that they are enhancing. They are also a signature of the manufacturer. Means the way how they are actually storing the data, and the capacity that they can actually uh, store is based on a list of properties that the manufacturer do impose. It's not a matter of a copy paste. So the manufacturer, let's say, without giving any names, hard disk, external hard disks from the brand A, it stores, for example, when we talk about a hard disk with 1 terabyte of size, it stores 1 terabyte less 1 kilobyte, let's say. It's too big. It's very perfect. But from the brand B, the 1 terabyte hard drives, they stored 1 terabyte less 1 megabyte. It's less in quality than the brand A. What is the reason here? Actually, it is the context of here, the track density may be, the zone bit recording may be. It's the scenario of how the data is being recorded and how the reading of those data is going to be achieved. Taking the example only. As per the recognition, because the computers we are using today, they are not all new computers. We have to consider, as investigators, as digital forensics specialists, we have to have the knowledge related to the old versions of the operating systems of the computer's hardware in order to be able to investigate all. When it concerns the old versions here, we may see that the storage device, they are given a wider space for the heads, the head of reading. What is the head of reading here? Actually, every single disk inside the hard drive, it has a head of reading. See this triangle here, this line here. It is a head of reading. So there are spaces in between the tracks in a hard drive, and which is more wide than what we see today in our today's actually storage medias. One of the other considerations that we have to recognize is the storage architecture, whether it is the connectivity actually from the storage media into the computer's motherboard or the the digital device motherboard. It is one of the other considerations, because reading a disk with the new system is not the same way reading a disk with an old system. Here to recognize that the way how to access the media is a question. If you are just choosing a different, or let's say a wrong way to access the data, nothing is lost and nothing is at the same time being read. You'll not be able to read because you are not using the appropriate method to access the drive, no more no less. But nothing is lost. You'll not be able to read. You can see the entry point, but you'll not see any data. Here we talk about the architecture, the hard drive architecture, IDE or SATA. Mainly, they are the most commercialized architectures. Yes, whatever. Yes, the file structure of the Microsoft. Here we talk about the clusters that they actually use to store the data. Mainly, the example we given earlier is 512 is the default sector size, but it can be actually customized based on either the need or the operating system capability and operating system version and distribution. So 512 is the minimum size cluster size. It is it is half kilobyte, 512 bytes. And the customization, it is to be done manually, yes, possibly. More than that, it has to be actually matching the capability of the operating system. If we talk about, for example, an old version of an operating system, for example, the XP SP1 Service Pack 1, we cannot go for 4096 bytes, which is actually 4 kilobytes as the sector size, and we expect that it would work actually very fluently and comfortably. No, it will not, because this is a wide actually size for a sector, or for let's say for a cluster, which is causing which might cause the latency for the processing later on. It will not cause the system to fail, but at the initial stage, it will cause the latency in processing. The here actually, just one understanding is that when we talk about different sizes of these sectors, means if we talk about a sector that actually sizes 512 bytes. Okay, later on we are going to modify it into 4024, actually, which is 1 kilobyte. What happens? It is a matter of combining sectors together. Two sectors, they will be actually combined into one sector, which minimizes the time of processing, yes, which minimizes in our, let's say, newly set operating system, which will minimize the overhead of writing. Means actually how many sectors we need. We will need one instead of two. So we will point one instead of pointing two. The system will actually reference one instead of referencing two. So it is an amelioration, yes, but there are constraints also. But for now, we can just what we have to memorize is that once you talk about increasing the sector size, so we are going to combine sectors already available. Combination. It's a junction. Yeah, each and every cluster has actually an address. It's an address. It's a logical address, and the address has to be logically recognized by the operating system. No more, no less. At the same time, those logical addresses they are pointed with physical address. Remember that the storage device it's a physical memory at the beginning. Then after logically segregated using what? Logically using the operating system. Newly set operating systems they enhance new, let's say, file systems, which are actually they are allocating more spacious space, and they are capable to process data on a very wide range, let's say a very wide space or storage space, because it's not a matter of just it's a consequence. We can increment the hard disk from 1 TB to 2 TB and it will run fully. No, it's not like that. The file system has to have the capability to point this new hard drive or this new space or extended space of storage. If you talk about a very primitive operating system, let's say file system, it will not have the capability to process a very new hard disk, which is, for example, equipped with 4 TB. It will not. It will show only a few bytes or a few, let's say, megabytes or a few gigabytes. It will not be able to manage all the space. So the file system here is a question of updates. What we see here is the FAT. In our example here, the FAT16, but it's not unique. The FAT, the file allocation table. In our example here, FAT16, it is one of the amelioration, the startup of the new era of file systems. They do have the capability of processing larger hard drives, larger hard drives. Remember, the units here, we talk about GBs in this example, not megabytes. Partition gap, actually, it is a space that actually the system will recognize, or this file system will recognize. It is a space that comes between the partitions. It is an empty space. It is a slot. Yes. For all and each single processing activity, there will be actually recognition by the let's say the partitioning table. At the end of the day, the new file systems they are partitioning the storage device into partitions and point them actually accordingly. So any modification to any of the partitions has to be actually updated in the partition table, which is the allocation, let's say the file system or the uh, file allocation table. Our example here, the FAT. Whatever the version of the FAT. Yeah, there have to be actually a declaration. The very famous actually file systems, the new technology file system or the FAT file allocation table with its distributions. There are versions of the file allocation table, the FAT. All of them, they are capable actually. This is in a Windows interface. This is in a Windows interface, and it is showing the storage devices. See those two, they are this line and this line, they are storage devices. How we are able to map them here is due to the file system. It's due to the file system. Okay, viewing the content actually, or exploring the content of a sector or a cluster, or in general, we talk about the storage device, storage media. It leads us to explore the content in different ways: machine language, human language. Machine language assembly, we can talk about assembly, for example. We can talk about the processor language, or let's say the high language, which can be actually seen here in hexadecimal representation, or the human language, which is what we can read, we as humans, we can understand. Because here, if we talk about the hexadecimal language, we'll not be able to translate it immediately. There have to be a scenario via which we translate those hexadecimal content into something that we read. Here it is visible. So processor language, steel processor language, human language. Yeah, this is actually for reference only. Steel for reference only. Okay. For the context of the what is the hexadecimal is one of the language, let's say the annotation, let's say, or encryption, or let's say yes, something like that. It's the coding system. It's one of the coding systems that the majority or the totality of the digital devices do recognize. It's one of the representations that has to be actually followed in order to represent the data or media in front of a digital device. There is actually there is a list of values that has to be recognized. What does it do? What does it represent? And so on. Every single storage media, let's say here we talk about a drive, maybe not only to be a full drive, full storage media. At the beginning, there is an indicator. There is an indicator that this is the beginning. It's an offset. It's a scenario of offset to say, hey, this is the start of the block. This is the start of the block. This is the start of the block. There is an indicator. So this indicator here actually seen in blue in our reader. Here is also seen in blue in our reader. But while we are using two different, oh, but it's based on not using based on two different file systems. Usually there is an indicator to indicate the startup of storage media, or let's say a storage, let's say partition. I'm not going to explore those hexadecimals. Yeah, so the master boot record, it's one of the very famous components in a hard drive. Mainly when actually the hard drive is utilized for the operating system storage, installation and storage. The MBR master boot record, it is responsible for loading the operating system into the memory from the hard drive into the RAM master boot record. There are actually this MBR. It is the one responsible for loading the operating system. If it gets damaged, so the operating system will not launch, then the computer will not run. To control the behavior of this MBR, there are tools that can be utilized to do so. There are tools that can be utilized to control and modify the MBR, the master boot record. Distributions behind the newly or the new technology of file systems, it's long list. But what you have to recognize is that based on each file system, there is an adequate and a compatible device. It's not any for any. No, it is not any file system for any device. No. False. The answer is false here. Each file system is compatible with a specific digital device. And not only compatibility, every single file system is capable of processing a certain amount of data, amount of memory data, let's say. Taking the example, part 12 and FAT32. What's the difference? Here, mainly, they are both of them file allocation tables. They are following the same technology. Yet, this one would allocate actually clusters with a size of 2 power 12. Yeah, this one is going to allocate clusters with the size of 2 power 32, which is much more and more bigger than this one. So the size of the memory to be managed by the FAT32 is much more bigger than the memory to be managed by the FAT12. Very clear. Yeah, still size as per examples only. So 2 terabytes can be allocated by the FAT32, can be managed by FAT32. But this FAT12 does not allow, cannot reach to manage this size, cannot reach to size. See, it's a very small size. Properties. Yes, okay. Whenever actually the file system is capable of managing a bigger size actually of clusters. When you talk about the FAT12, FAT16, FAT32, there is a distinction point in between each when we talk about the fragmentation and the cluster size. Fragmentation means we are going to allocate spaces, and it has to be actually in a jointed manner, something like that. The file system influences that. So if we are just using the FAT32, the fragmentation will be actually required frequently, and it would consume more time to process such a task, which influences the behavior of the computer, to reduce the behavior, to reduce the capability of the computer. If you allocate the FAT12 for bigger computers, for bigger, let's say, storage devices. Yet, it is not the case if we go with a high cluster size managed by a different file system. What you have to understand is that the file system, it influences the capability of the processor based on different tasks. Amongst of them, the size of the cluster allocated for each upon each storage, let's say, interface. In addition to the fragmentation, it's another constraint that the file system goes for to do it. Path 12 is not the best file system to use in order to fragment a 2 terabyte hard disk, let's say, or storage media. It's not the best option. Why? Because of its limited, let's say, capability. Yet it's the best to go for the FAT32. Here, you may have a look and understand what are the differences in between each, but what you have to understand for sure, for you as an investigator, is that the file system influences the processing capability and the time of the processing. I'm not going to explain this because actually we saw this in cybersecurity. If you are with me, every single memory actually, which is a RAM, is allocated a space for each running process, and this space is segregated into 6 portions. Most of them, what we see in front of us, the Slack and so on. Okay, the loading into what you have to know is that the loading of a media into a memory It is not a copy paste, just one bucket ready to be put. No, it's a slack to be allocated for each bucket, let's say, we may say. So slack number one, خلاص, it has been filled, then the system will allocate another slack, slack number two. It has been filled, then slack number three, and so on. Every single slack, it is a space via which we are going. It's not via which a system is going to allocate, is going to store data, is going to utilize for storing data or something like that. The space in the memory in the RAM, it is not fully utilized from the beginning. No, it is to be utilized based on the media in question or treated in question. So whenever needed, there will be an incremented space for this allocated media or for this treated media. I'll stop here at this level. See you in the lab later, Aya, unless you have any questions.
No, doctor.